Hey everyone, what's going on? Welcome to the latest episode of the Genesys Cloud Community's Q&A show, the show where we answer your pressing questions in the Genesys Cloud online community. My name is Matt Lawson. I'm your online community manager, and today we have a classic episode revving up for you. Our above average Joes are our pro services team that are just so generous to come onto the show and help us answer your questions. But they've actually taken some extra time for this episode to prepare some demos for you. And that leads us to what I'm calling Above Average Joe's August. That's right. The Above Average Joes are going to be dominating the Q&A show this month and answering your questions. Today, we start with Dean, who is going to give you a demo of a brand new feature that you are going to love, especially if you happen to be a collaborator with business intelligence experts. This feature is going to be invaluable to you, and Dean walks you through it. After that, we're going to answer questions in the community. And one of the questions that we talk about is actually going to be a two-parter. So Dean did a demo of an answer to a question for us on 50/50 queues. We're going to come back next week, and our friend Maxime is going to finish the conversation with some great use cases that are very practical and elaborate a little bit more on the topic. I promise you it's going to be a great 2 episodes. Above Average Joe's August is live. I can't wait to get started. Let's do it. Hey, Dean, welcome to the Q&A show. How are you?
Good, Matt. How are you?
Good, doing well. The last time we recorded, it was really fun. I got to meet you for the first time. I guess our audience did. And you and I were talking off camera, and you were like, there's a lot of information that we know that we'd like to share proactively. For instance, like you were saying, we know a lot about new features that are rolling out. We've done a lot of really interesting projects with customers that we'd like to share our knowledge of. And so we talked about the possibility of doing that as a segment on the show at some point. And wouldn't you know it, that point came today. And you're here because you have some information about a newish feature that was rolled out called static links. Is that correct?
Yep. Yeah.
Cool. Can't wait to learn about that. Real quick, can you talk a little bit about who you are, what you do, how long you've been with Genesys?
Yeah. So Dean Thames, I am in the professional services organization with Genesys. I've been here, this is my 3rd year. And I am working with large enterprises on migration programs into the cloud.
Cool. Have you worked with any customers to do static links yet?
Yeah, so there's a couple of use cases that pop up that have been pretty helpful.
Cool.
And typically they fall into the range of you have a BI resource, a highly knowledgeable BI resource, and you want to get them some information, and you don't want to go through your regular overhead of the data warehousing process that you may have in place.
Cool.
So, yeah.
Well, as somebody who early in my career worked in business intelligence, I can't wait to learn more about this. I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to you. What have you got?
Okay. So yeah, so as Matt said, this is a feature we released. It's been a couple months now. It's called Static Links, and there is a resource center page on this that explains it. And essentially what this does is it allows supervisors within Genesys Cloud to create views as they normally would in their workspace, set the filters and set the metrics that they want to include in those views the way that they want them, and then create a static link for that view. And what that does, see if I can zoom in on this picture. I don't know if I can or not. What that does is it gives you essentially an API. It's not an API, but it gives you a web resource that a secondary process can then refer to consume that view, right? So if you've ever thought of a situation where you created a view and you want to export that data to somebody else, right? So you've got to go through the process of downloading the CSV and then emailing it to them. This is a mechanism to enable them to consume that data without the manual intervention piece. Okay. So if we go to the view section, and I've created my view, I've applied all my filters that I want, and I've added the metrics down here that I want to include. If I go here to hit the export panel, what I can do is typically or historically, people would have set this to email to somebody or schedule the report to send to their inbox. What this feature allows us to do is when you go to save it, you get an option down here to generate a static link. So you can schedule the report to recur, say weekly or daily or whatever. And then what happens is when you go to generate the static link, you don't get a new report every time it runs. That existing report updates, right? So if I go over here and we look at my inbox, for example, I've got a couple right here. These are just reports that I've scheduled to run. This one ran on August 3rd. This one, well, it looks like they ran at the same time. So these two things are static, and every time they run, the data in them gets updated. And what happens is you can come right here and on the report itself, go to copy static link. And if I go here and I open up another notepad, what you can do is see that static link. So this is essentially, it's not necessarily, well, it is an API. It doesn't look like your normal API, but essentially you can treat it just like an API. So if you have a BI resource in your organization that uses, say, Power BI, you can provide them this link and tell them whenever that report's going to run, then they can schedule the process on their side to do it. The way it might look like is in the form of a PowerShell script. So this is an example that I have where it's your standard API request, except instead of an actual API, what you're going to run it against is the static link. So you would use the OAuth credentials that you would set up for that user. You would use the standard OAuth token mechanism that you might use for any other API request. And then you can go fetch that data, or their process can then go fetch that data. And again, they're consuming the view that you created, right? So you don't necessarily have to work with your metrics people or your ETL people. You can just create the view yourself and then tell your BI people how to get to it. And then what happens when it runs, if we go back here, I'll just run this one really quick. If I just run it as PowerShell, I'll get a little window that pops up and it'll go and it'll fetch that data. And then what I've done is I just wrote it just to write this data out to the view. But then what it's doing is it's creating a local file, a local CSV file. There's a lot of information out on the internet about how to do that in PowerShell. And then it just dumps this page right out here. And then they can pull it in, and it's the same information that was in that view that you created.
Wow,
So
that's
awesome. Static links work.
Wow, that's really cool. Yeah, I can see how a lot of people would be interested in this. Great way to put information at the fingertips of the people who really need it. This is fantastic. I don't think I have any questions. For once, I kind of understood what you were doing. I don't always do that in a demo. This time I did. Anything else you want to add or share on the topic?
No, that's about it. Go ahead and give it a shot and put some questions out in the community. And if you have any questions about it, we'll help you out.
Cool. I love that. And speaking of questions in the community, I think you and I are going to hop over and talk with your colleague, Maxim, and maybe we'll try to answer a few.
Yep.
All right.
When the online community has questions and no one else can help, there's one group who can answer the call. They're pro services ready for hire. The Above Average Joes. Meet Patrick Johnson, Senior Principal Pro Services Consultant. Meet George Canal, an expert with Genesys for over 23 years.
Meet Dean Thames and his canine assistant Lulu, pros in enterprise technology for 25 years. Meet Maxim Svetov, a pro services guru who speaks 3 languages and has worked with contact centers for 19 years.
Maxim, Thank you so much for joining us, Dean. Welcome back. Guys, it's always a pleasure to sit down and answer questions and let's go ahead and get started. So this question comes to us from Karen. Karen wants to know how to set a number to answer with a message only. She writes, "Hi there. There's probably a very simple solution. We have phone numbers basically that come in and we just want them to play a pre-recorded message and then hang up. For instance, answer, play the message, hang up. Our friend and former colleague, Paul Simpson, said, this doesn't even require a queue. You can simply create an inbound call flow and architect that plays the message and disconnects. Hope that helps. Now, talking with you all previously, I know you mentioned that Paul's answer is correct, but we just wanted to add a little bit more flavor and introduce Karen to a term called IVR, which Maxime, I'll let you go ahead and just give Karen all the advice you have.
Sure. IVR stands for Interactive Voice Response, and that's one of the main functionalities of any modern contact center. So you can just play a message, offer menus, transfer call somewhere else, do whatever you want to do with the call to automate the processing of calls. And yes, the answer that was provided is absolutely right. You just need to add two actions into the inbound flow: play message and then disconnect. And you don't even need a queue because you just want to play message. That's basically the bread and butter of any IVR.
Cool. So Karen, if you're like me and had no idea what IVR stands for, check out the Knowledge Network. It's just KNOW.genesys.com. It has unified search, so it's a great place to search our documentation, the community, and a lot of other sites that will help you get going in this process. I think it'll also show you what training's available. So definitely check out the Genesys Knowledge Network or know.genesys.com. It'll be a great tool for you. All right, guys, let's see if we can find another question to answer. All right, so for our second question, it comes in from Ram. Ram wants to know about area code-based routing. They write, "Hi all, I know there's been some conversations about this in the past, and we decided to go forward with the data table approach for the zip codes. One of the requirements we have is to route an interaction based on the zip code entered by the customer in the IVR. However, I would like to create a data table with a range of zip codes as unique identifiers. And as customers enter the zip code, I want to be able to search for them within the range. For example, if the customer enters 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I need to be able to get the entry from the data table for 1,200, 1,200 to 1,200 and 500, something like that. I may have read those numbers wrong. Is it possible to query an input on a range? I appreciate your thoughts. Talking about this question before we recorded, you all said Paul's in here again, offering some great advice. So is Josh, who actually was given best answer. And just as a follow-up, I noticed Ram did say, in this scenario, I would need a one-to-one mapping since I have a combination of zip codes along with other attributes that is chosen in the IVR. I'm just going to pass the mic to you. What have you got?
So yeah, we have several options how to tackle this. Well, it is true that data tables are limited to 5,000 rows out of the box. But if you have a valid case, you can open a ticket without care, and they will increase this limit for you, right? So that's option one. In this case, you don't have to, overcomplicate your logic, just to increase the data table. Another road would be to use external data storage. Well, it could be data table, database outside of Genesys Cloud or web service. There are plenty of them. So in this case, you would just use data action to do that. There was another idea that in some cases, you can just split your data set into multiple data tables and then use some sort of a logic inside your IVR, right? Which table to look for. Maybe you just need to look at multiple tables. However, there is another way to do that. If you want to really increase your capacity of your data tables and still want to keep it in-house, right? You don't want to use external data storage. You can create a dummy outbound contact list, which will be used not for outbound campaigns, but only for storing data. Our contact lists they support, if I'm not mistaken, up to 1 million records, which is a significant increase from 5,000. So in this case, you'll create an outbound contact list, and the ID column for this contact list will be your zip code, right? And then you can use data action inside your flow to do a lookup. And I can also add that on App Foundry, we have a collection of data actions, custom data actions. And one of them is specifically for that, to search within the contact list.
Wow. Maxime, I if I'm not mistaken, I think you gave them 4 possible ways to tackle this this issue. So I think they have a ton of options, and yeah, so good luck to you with that project. It sounds like you've got maybe upwards of 1 million ways you can kind of splice this. Dean, anything you wanted to add?
No, I'm interested to try out the contact list one. I hadn't thought of that before, but it sounds like a pretty good idea. So I'm going to give it a shot.
Cool. Let's go ahead and move on to our next question. So for this next question, we have a brand new question that just came into the site. The question is about real-time speech analytics and the ability to alert supervisors of calls trending poorly. We are relatively new to Genesys Cloud, and our customers are very interested in the ability to spot keywords, sentiment analysis in real time. Their use case is the ability to alert managers / supervisors of an inbound ACD voice call that is trending in a bad direction. I have done some research and learned that speech / text analytics in Genesys Cloud seem to occur after the call has ended, which we will be talking about. Is this correct? If so, are there plans to offer real-time sentiment analysis, topic spotting, and the ability to alert supervisors of calls that appear to be handled in a negative fashion / poorly while the call is still active? Any insights would be appreciated. Well, came to the right place. But Dean, what do you think? Any thoughts on this question?
Yeah, so Shane's correct. Currently, we do not transcribe the calls for sentiment in real time. That is going to be on the roadmap, but at the moment, the entry point for this would be leveraging a custom dev app that we can walk you through really quick. Essentially, you would leverage the notification topic for transcriptions. These topics will tell you when a transcription has started, and you could custom dev something here, and as long as you had a way to consume those events, this would be an AWS Event Bridge application off the top of my head. So this is how the topics look raw. And then we also have, it looks like somebody in our developer blog has posted, well, it's Jacob, has posted a note out here about how to do this. And what he's saying is essentially that same thing, right? You would leverage the notifications API to ingest the notifications. Now he's saying integrated client application here. I'm not sure what exactly that is. It's been a little more time reading through this, but it looks like you would be able to ingest that notification topic and then trigger some kind of an event over here back into Genesys Cloud. So it's a partial answer. But I would expect we have a lot more coming along these lines.
Yeah,
So,
we were debating whether or not to cover this because what we gave you is definitely a partial answer. What we've also been talking about is how this will require, thorough development on your end to really figure this out. We're just kind of giving you we're pointing you in a direction. I'm not going to say a dangerous direction, but if this is something you really want, these are the 2 resources that we would encourage you to start with. And one of the things that Maxime noticed was you said transcription start at the end of a call, but Maxime, you mentioned something about how actually transcriptions can go every 5 minutes. Can you clarify what that means or how that works?
No, it's basically a continuation of this article about notifications API, how it sends updates on the transcription every 5 minutes, right? So it's the first event would be the start of the call, and then after that, every 5 minutes, it will start sending you updates. Is it a real time? No, but it's a near real time.
Yeah, so we're giving you just enough information to be dangerous, but hey, you said all information would be welcome. So from us to you, happy August. Good luck with your project, Shane. Can't wait to hear how it goes, and we hope this was helpful. All right, so the next thing we wanted to talk about is really exciting because Dean picked a question in the community that he's actually been taking part in, and what he's going to do now is do a more thorough explanation / demo of the topic. It's about 50/50 queues. And that's going to set the stage. What's really cool is then in our next episode, which will just be in a couple of weeks, Maxime's going to come back and he's going to follow up Dean's discussion with some real life use cases. Is that correct, guys?
Yeah, so it's a real life example. I think Maxime's is just a little bit more complicated. This is an entry point for a similar concept.
Just everybody, please keep in mind as we're going through Dean's question, we will be coming back, the three of us, in the next episode. So if anything Dean showed piqued your interest, reply to this video on the YouTube channel, reply to the discussion. We always have the video and a discussion in the community. Reply there, because if you have questions for Dean or Maxime, I can make sure they get answered in next week's episode. What I'm going to do is read the question, then let's get into the demo. How can we split calls between two queues without any option on the single inbound number, like 50% calls on QA and 50% calls on QB? Like, for instance, the first call goes to QA, the second call goes to QB, third call goes to QA, and so on.
So I'm going to share my screen. So that was a pretty fun thread. There was a lot of activity there. There were several good suggestions. There's really no right or wrong way to do it. It's just kind of a function of your comfort level and how you tend to handle things. But what made me think to do this was the rollout of our event triggers capability earlier this year. And it falls into the process automation category, which will be, being rolled out by the platform here in the coming months. It is available currently via API, and I'll walk through that just a little bit. But essentially the idea, and we talked about this on the last call, but essentially the idea is to have the platform react to an event and then go do something else based on the nature of that event. So we'll come back to that, but let me just take a look at this little Visio that I made for just a second. So this is a quickie diagram that I came up with to illustrate one of the concepts that was in that chat thread, which is to leverage a data table to inform routing. So this is pretty common. A lot of people do this. A call comes into your call flow. The application gets a hold of it and starts processing it. And the first thing we do is we check to see the DNS number that the call was sent to. And here I have it labeled as index, but it could be DNS. And then you check to see, okay, what queue should that call go to based on the number that was called? Pretty common. The thread, there was a couple of suggestions in that thread that said, hey, what you can do from there is put a bit of logic into that call flow and then modify this value in the data table to flip it. So if the value was originally QA, you set it to QB. If the value was QB, you set it to QA, right? So you do that in line in your call flow, and then you send the call to the queue, right? So you set the variable here for what queue it's going to go to, then you send the call to the queue after you run this logic. So that's pretty common. I think a lot of people do that. But really what you're doing is you're inserting a bit of a sub application into your flow that really doesn't have anything to do with the flow. So this piece right here doesn't have anything to do with getting that call to the queue. What you're doing is you're informing the application of a condition that you can then consume on the next call. And that's really what was at the heart of that discussion. So what we have now with event triggers is the ability to separate this piece out and handle it independently, which is kind of neat. So this diagram illustrates that a little bit. Let me zoom back out. So up here you see the call flow is pretty straightforward. The call comes in, the application begins to process it. We check the data table here, we set the variable, and we send the call to the queue. But what happens is when you use event triggers is when the application begins processing that call, it triggers an event. And a lot of people might think of events as the ones who are familiar with it as associated with the AWS event bus on that side. This is actually internal to Genesys Cloud, which is kind of nice. So what you can do is create a condition on our events, match it, and if it doesn't match, it just gets discarded. If it does match, you can then trigger a workflow. And in this case, what happens is this workflow handles the piece that we illustrated over here independently of the actual call flow. So the call progresses up here, just minds its own business and does its thing. But at the same time, in the background, we've triggered a workflow that'll go and do that work. It's going to go and check that data table and then update the data table based on the logic that you want. In this case, it's to flip the value of the queue from one to another. So that's the high level view of it. Eventually, the trigger application or the trigger capability will be in the Genesys Cloud UI. Currently, it's an API, and we can take a look at that in just a second. But the syntax looks basically like this. You subscribe to a topic. You tell it what, subscribe is not the right word. You set it for a topic to monitor. You give it a target of what's going to happen once that event is matched. And then you have some match criteria. And in this case, we're looking for an inbound call, an inbound voice call that matches the DNS of that value that was in the data table. That's what this one looks like. And I think over in the developer portal, this is the page right here. I'm assuming we could add links to this or reference it. If you just Google Genesys Cloud Triggers, you'll get to this page. There's more information about how to do this. So that's how the trigger looks. And then what we can do is just do a really quick test. I'll go over to my environment really quick, and we'll take a look at QA and QB. So what I'll do is I'll just put a call in really quick.
Thanks for calling. Please hold for the next agent.
Oh, current interval. Okay, so now we have a call in QA. I'm going to hang this up. And if I call back.
Anything to hear that music again, for sure.
Now that call is going to go to QB and so on. And so what we can do is take a look at, just real quick, that interaction. And we can just take a look. What I like to do when I build flows out is add information about what happened. Let's see, is that, yeah, it's today. Is add information into the call that helps me understand what was going on with that call. And that's in the form of participant data value. So if we take a look at that interaction, what we can see is the workflow was triggered. We looked up the data table. We checked the DNS value. We checked the queue logic. The data action to fetch that table or fetch that value was a success. The current queue was B. We set it to QA. So that kind of helps you understand. It's good for troubleshooting, especially when you're developing a flow to begin with. And then the workflow itself looks like this. There's only a couple of steps. This, the first thing is we go and we fetch the queue as it exists in the data table right now. And then we go and we assess the queue logic. If it equals QA, then we set it to QB. If it doesn't equal QA, then we set it to QA. And then those functions look like that. So that's just a different way. It's a little bit more of an elaborate way of doing it. It's not the easiest way, but it's, I think, a good example of how process automation and event triggers can work and solve kind of a unique problem, or a common problem. I think a lot of people run into this.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I can definitely see why you were like, it would be easier to do this as a video than to try to type it all out as documentation. One of the things I was thinking about, because I actually just went through this when I was calling a support team. I was thinking about, let's imagine the first time I call in, I go to QA, but something happens and I get disconnected. For instance, like you and I, we were talking about how last night there was really bad weather. Mm-hmm. When I call back, can this logic understand that I may want to talk to the same rep again, or would that really complicate kind of the workflow that you've built there?
So yeah, this is a pretty simple example, but you could do that, right? You could attempt to determine who that customer is and then build some logic into it to compensate for a condition like that. So yeah, and that falls into preferred agent routing and things of that nature. But yeah, you can certainly do that.
Would you build that inside of the trigger, or like if you were looking at the diagram you have now, where would you build that in?
It would probably be right around in here, right? So at this stage here is when you're assembling all your information about that caller. So what do you know about that caller? And the information you get about them could be as simple as this: what number did they call? It could be as complex as, all the account information you have about them, say in ServiceNow or Salesforce or another third-party application. There could also be an existing call record for them that says, hey, this person just called in a second ago and they talked to Matt. Let's try to find that. Let's see what we can do.
And then if not, it would go back to the AB flow or whatever.
Some kind of a default route. Exactly.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, thanks so much for the demo. Anything else you want to add?
No, it's certainly not the easiest way to do it, but it's kind of fun, right? And it's a good entry point into event triggers. So yeah, I would encourage people to start getting familiar with those. They're fun.
Dean, thanks so much for that demo. Maxime, I can't wait to see what kind of extra information you can provide us next week and what use cases you bring, because I know you've talked about how you've done this before with a couple of customers. So really excited to see how this conversation evolves. And again, everybody, if you have a particular question for these two on the topic of 50/50 queues, let us know on the YouTube channel or in the community. All right, Maxime, Dean, thanks so much for coming by.
Thank you.
All right, have a good one, guys. That does it for this episode. Thanks for hanging around, and I'll be seeing you soon. Have a good one, everybody. Bye.
Thanks for tuning in for this week's episode. We hope it was helpful and maybe a little bit entertaining. Each week, our host and experts review community discussions and debate what content to discuss, so your voice matters. Did we miss something? Do you have a question for the show? Let us know. Join the conversation at the Genesys online community. As a Genesys customer or partner, you can create an account. Just click the sign in button found on most pages and follow the necessary instructions to create an account. Also, feel free to email us at qashow@genesys.com. We'd love to hear from you. If this is your first episode, welcome. You can view our entire archives. Go to the Helpful Links panel found on most community pages and find the QA Show archive that interests you.
Also, check out the community's prize wall for current contests and previous winners.
We appreciate your support of the show and the community. Cheers!